we are talking today how we optimize cloud security using AWS best practices. So thank you everyone for joining. Let's get right on to the topic and what we're going to talk, and we'll try to oh. Oh, this remote?
Okay. Don't touch anything.
All right. So how do you optimize? Cloud security is a really major and vast area, right? So how do we optimize and take control of cloud security? What AWS is recommending that we start with awareness. And what awareness really means is you identify that what are some of the areas that we need to look at and gradually adopt a culture of kind of adopting the best practices available in the industry, of course, from the AWS. So while you are introducing the kind of identifying those best practice areas and the sections that you have to look at, you basically look at the best practices and kind of continue to evaluate any deviation from the best practices that's available. So as you do that, AWS has certain tools available for us to help us continue to adopt those best practices and identify the deviation from the best practices. So we will going to talk about these tools and services. Those are well-architected, AWS Trusted Advisor, and Security Hub. That how those are going to help us optimize security as we go. And of course, we will also talk about how you would respond and how you can automate some of those identifying your potential security gaps as well as remediate those as you go. So before we go further, we want to talk briefly the shared responsibility model AWS put for security. And you need to understand this for its entirety, that what areas customer really has the potential, has the responsibility to make sure those are secure enough. And I'm not going to go ahead all the details, but in your platform and applications and you're managing the access to your security and the resources, it's managed and owned by the customers. Whether we are in AWS, we are responsible for security of the cloud, including the data center access and security, including our global infrastructure security. So if we look at cloud security in a kind of higher level, we are looking at like foundational themes, and these are those 5 foundational themes AWS also look at. And as you look at each of those areas, like including identity and access management, there are various capabilities and areas that you have to kind of find out how we are doing it. How as a customer you are implementing each of those areas. Like for example, identity management at scale. As you grow, as our customers are growing, identity management at scale becomes an issue unless you are adopting the best practices from the beginning. How you are doing federation, how you are managing access rights, how you are accessing limitations, how you are kind of governing internally that what access rights and what least privilege rules are adopted in the access control across your organization. So each of those areas are important as per security is concerned. And as you grow, all of those should be bottom-up taken care from each of your applications and the resources as you deploy. So each of those are as important, like detective and control, infrastructure protection, data protection, and each of these capabilities, AWS is providing a series of tools and services that will going to help you optimize those areas of security. So we will not going to go each of those, but for example, identity and access management area, we have the IAM. That's one of the core services that all of you are using, how you are doing single sign-on, how you are using like organization and putting the guardrails and security controls for your internal governance so that you can manage for the entire organization, not by particularly for your one account. So then I'm trying to go into the key services that will provide you those best practice recommendations, as that's part of the core topic we are discussing today. These are the 3 tools. Those are primarily available for you to look at those security areas that are being identified by these services in your infrastructure that will going to help you identify and optimize your areas of best practices. So Trusted Advisor, well-architected, and Security Hub, we're going to talk about these 3 services. So well-architected is the best practice place that you will find all of the best practices as you start designing and building or deploying your applications. And security is one of the pillars out of the 6 pillars, as you can see. So you should be adopting this framework as you build your applications. As per the security pillar is concerned, this will give you these design principles, that how you are adopting least privilege and centralize your access management, how you're managing traceability of alerts and how you're auditing, how you're putting your logs together, and how you're collecting your metrics. Then, of course, it will give you guidelines that how you're applying security at all levels. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but what we are telling our customers that please look at all of these guidelines and how you are reflecting as you deploy your resources. Trusted Advisor is the home of our AWS best practices. So if you are not using today, consider looking at Trusted Advisor. This is a service that will give you the real-time findings from your infrastructure for your account, that what's not following the best practices and what is deviating from the AWS best practices. This is, there are ways you can codify and automate some of the findings from the Trusted Advisor, and Sandeep, my colleague, will going to talk about more about how you can automate potential findings and remediate as it finds. There are multiple services in AWS. Those are providing best practice recommendations through the Trusted Advisor. So these are some of the example services that you will find AWS best practice recommendations and its findings through Trusted Advisor. As per security pillar is concerned, these are some of the recommendations on security. So as you can see, there are some core services, core recommendations. Those are available across all service tiers. There are additional 15 recommendations for separate separate support tiers like business, on-ramp, and enterprise support customers. And if you are using Security Hub, there are additional 200 or so recommendations. Those are the foundational security recommendations are also available through Trusted Advisor. And there are other capabilities that coming through Trusted Advisor as per the security is concerned. Now, I think with that said, we want to get more into the best practices that AWS is referring and recommending to our customers. And I want to transfer to my colleague, Sandeep.
Thank you, Manas. Yeah, so Manas did talk about like security best practices and recommendations, but the short answer is it's a very broad topic. Best practice and recommendations you get from multiple sources. Well-architected is one. When you have done a well-architected review, you have a set of best practices there. There are also security guides, and security guides for service-specific security guides. For each service, there are again best practice recommendations, and then you also have white papers, which talks about a much broader deployment and architecture and recommends best practices for that. And then you also get custom recommendations, and there could be recommendations that you get from SAs, you get from AWS specialists that you have talked to. So net there is a whole bunch of stuff that you're exposed to. And just to show you, like, and we get this from customers once in a while, it's just kind of awareness. So this is just a slide that shows you the specific guides that you have for different services. And these are all like best practice guides, that you get, like, it's all categorized nicely, laid out, so you can go through them, read them, and implement some of those best practices. So here is a reference to the security guides, best white papers. So it's just filtered by security, and you see a lot of areas that have been touched upon by these guides. So now, like, what do you do? Like, you have gone through your well-architected reviews, you have done your service-specific best practices, and there's a whole lot of, like, work that gets in before you go and release your workloads. So how do you know, like, that after you have done all of these things, that you are actually, like, meeting the standards or meeting the requirements that you're supposed to? So, what we do is that another service that AWS has is, Security Hub. So how many of you use Security Hub, or you know what Security Hub is? Anybody? Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, few. So yeah, so Security Hub is basically like in a central place where you will get all your, like, the results of your security checks in one place, and you can view them in a single pane of glass. So just a summary slide, it tells you, like, I'm 64% compliant on 3 different security standards I've enabled. There's a NIST, there is PCI, and there are a few more standards that you can score against, or you can, like, evaluate your workloads against. So if you have to be compliant with some of these standards. You can also get a nice little breakdown per service and per standard, and you get a dashboard view of how compliant you are and what the gaps are. So how does Security Hub work under the covers? So essentially what Security Hub does is it consolidates all these alerts, all this, like, security checks from multiple other security-related services that AWS has, like things like Macy, Guard Duty, Firewall Manager, and lots more. So it's one place where you get a single pane of glass. And also, another thing I want to point out is it also integrates with third-party solutions. Like McAfee, like, Rapid7, and a bunch of other partner solutions, which can also send their alerts to Security Hub. So basically, in one place, you get a holistic view of all your security checks that you need to comply with. And now that you have all these checks, what you can do is you can go search and filter. You can group by, you can categorize, and it has a pretty neat, like, query capabilities. As you can see, this looks pretty bad, like, 5,236. But again, this is like synthetic data. But you get an idea of, like, how close you are to being compliant and what you need to do. So another feature that within Security Hub is Security Hub Insights. So think of them as saved queries. You can design your queries based on different criteria. There are standard templates that are already there, and you could create your own if you want to narrow down or focus on something. So now that you have, you have put in your best practices, you have got a view of, like, what the gaps are. You have seen, like, the checks that have failed. And next thing is, like, okay, let's go and remediate some of these things. So there is a way, like, you can automatically remediate some of these checks. And what I'm showing you here is a simple reference architecture. And actually, this is part of our prescriptive guidance guide. And you can go there, you can download this template, and you can deploy it. But essentially what it does is each time Security Hub, like, sees an alert, it sends it to EventBridge. You get an event in EventBridge. And from there, like, you can filter based on rules. You can, like, find out the ones you want to, like, remediate, and then hook that up to a Lambda target. And then Lambda would essentially go and execute the remediation steps. And optionally, you can send an email notifications. So, but when you go to, like, real environments, typically in production deployments, it's not a single account. You are dealing with multiple accounts. And the best practice here would be, like, you have an administrator account, which would be the central place where it receives alerts from other member accounts. So here, like, everything gets consolidated to the, like, admin account. And from there, again, the workflow kicks off. Same way, goes to EventBridge, goes to Lambda target. You could have a step function if it's kind of a more complex, asynchronous type of remediation that's required. It kind of assumes a role, cross-account role in the member account. and does the remediation. And again, you can have a SNS notification or go to CloudWatch and remediate it. But one thing to be careful here, like each time you do automatic remediation sounds cool, it's good, like to do it, but be very sure you test it. So you're not like remediating something you're not supposed to or doing it incorrectly. But again, like, the great thing is, like, if you have a lot of checks, maybe one failure could affect a bunch of resources, and it's pretty straightforward and standard, go ahead and do this. Again, this is part of our solutions, repository that you have, AWS Solutions. There is a link to this. I will post it, and you can get a ready-made template for this and customize it to your needs. Last one, and Manas did talk about Trusted Advisor, the two places where we see to get a view about what's broken and what needs to be fixed. So same thing, you can use the same techniques to go and remediate failures in Trusted Advisor. And as you can see, it's pretty similar. Event Bridge is where everything gets consolidated, everything there's an event in Event Bridge, and you can filter that, and based on what you need to do, you can kick off a Lambda, you can kick off multiple Lambdas, and address that. So this one specifically is a exposed key. So it gets into Event Bridge, the Lambda fires, goes to IAM. First thing is disable that key. Another one would be goes to CloudTrail to find out what has been exposed, and then eventually you can send a notification to SNS, Slack, or any other channel. So yeah, so that's all I had. So any questions?
When you built out this auto remediation or even out of the data lake, now the new data that's, since I don't need to necessarily take every CloudTrail log to discern what's happening, right? So I can take it from data lake, I can put an Event Bridge, I can put everything that I want to do, config, and so forth. Have you built out that remediation path from that, and do you see people leveraging it, or is it too new of a cloud?
You're talking about the security lake, or? Yeah, I'm sure that facility is there. It's still in preview. I myself haven't played around with it a lot. But that would be the that would be the method, that would be the approach.
I think that's what we're pushing, right?
Yeah. So that's that's the new service. It does lots more, gets a lot of more data, and again, I mean, you have this facility to remediate automatically, if you can do it manually. Sure.
What is the standard of security that every infrastructure is compared against, and is it the same for commercial versus government?
Well, it depends. Well, the question is what are the security standards typically customers go and comply with? And there are 5 or 6 different standards that Security Hub supports. There is NIST, there is PCI if you are in a credit card industry dealing with people's credit cards. So PCI DSS would be the standard. But for generically what customers typically do and what we have seen is the CIS Foundation benchmarks, the AWS CIS Foundation benchmark. So that's one that pretty much covers a lot of areas. Other standards have something specific that applies to those standards. Yeah. So CIS is typically what we see everybody tries to shoot for that.
How often you update it?
How often? The checks? Yeah. So I have to check on the exact frequency, but I think it's once or twice every 12 hours or it's 24 hours. And it depends, some checks, so there are 2 methods, 2 ways how these checks run. Some of them are scheduled, they run on a particular schedule, and some of them are change-based. So if the system detects there has been a change, it would go and, rerun that check and give you an alert.
So here's my use case, right? So let's say I understand that there are a lot of granular options, even if I understand all the security paradigm which I want to address, but if I as a customer knows that I have some PII data and all my infrastructure is in AWS, and my requirement is that none of this PII data, be it in transit, at rest, in storage, should be exposed, right? Humanize and all. So do I have to do that homework of identifying the components of AWS which needs to be put in, or can I give a use case and it can be decided that if you need to implement this use case, these are all the components that you will be using?
I'm sure there are recommendations, but just coming back to your question. So if you think you have PII, so at least you're aware where PII could be. So there are services that are there, Amazon Macy, if you have data in S3. Macy does a great job identifying PII. And there are if you are running, I don't know your workflow, perhaps we can talk later, But there are other services like Comprehend, for example. So that's a NLP-based service, ML-driven ML-based service, and it also has this capability to identify PII. And then you can, like, there are workflows that you can do. Everything is API-driven. You can go redact it and change it. Some people tokenize it. And there's another, like, neat one that is a great example you might want to check out. That applies to if the data is in S3. So it's called object lambdas, right? So when you, what that does is when you request an object from S3, it gets intercepted by a custom Lambda function. And you could write in Lambda that will go detect PII. Maybe it calls comprehend in the back end. Once it detects it, you can do your redaction and then serves this data. And it all happens transparently. The user has no idea. So it's like as the data flows, this workflow kicks in and does whatever you want to do, like maybe obfuscate PII. So multiple ways. Maybe I can point you some resources where people deal with this, but I'm sure there are a lot of in the white papers. Maybe you'll find more examples.
Any other questions?
You help folks with remediation if they're on the outside, the customers don't have to take care of their own applications, or just mostly folks within the AWS environments?
See, these are the remediation, if it's so if you're installed on AWS, right?
No, I'm talking in the shared responsibility model. Do you help folks on the outside when they have to be responsible for the applications and security of their own applications, or is it focused on AWS?
So this one is more focused on AWS.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
some of these tools like Trusted Advisor, that basically is giving you help to identify resources, those are configured in the application side. So that's part of the customer's responsibility in the pillar, that customers should be doing kind of managing those security layers. But Trusted Advisor is giving help as an advisor and scanning on the background and giving you the deviations and best practice that you need to follow. So there are capabilities that we are giving help to our customers to make sure the customer side of the resources and configurations are secure.
Any more?
Wanted to talk one more thing on this particular remediation. This is for the exposed keys. So as you know, even it is not our best practice recommendations for our customers to use IAM access keys, but there are customers still using it, right? There are reason and use cases that you need to use access keys for different reasons. But access keys has a best practice recommendations to rotate in a regular basis. So Trusted Advisor gives a recommendation to rotate within 3 months. And if it is not, it has a mechanism to flag YOLO or red. And if one of your access keys are compromised and left outside with access to, let's say, GitHub or somewhere, that's where the compromise happens. And there are cases that our customers got that problem. So this automated solution will detect it as well as delete those compromised keys. So the sample solution as well as the code is available in GitHub in our AWS Trusted Advisor tools area. So please take a look if you are interested.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.